Hey everybody, Hunter Ingram here, and I'm doing something a little fun today. If you've been on our website today or you follow our Cape Fear Unearthed podcast, you'll know that today we released a special episode about presidential visits to Wilmington. And we actually have at least 5 very notable presidential visits to Wilmington, the first of which was George Washington in 1791. And today, I am actually standing in front of this big tree behind me is the Washington Oak. Now I'm going to turn our camera around. We're actually right along US 17 here in Hampstead, so it's going to be a little loud just because of the number of cars coming by. But the Washington Oak is actually, and this is pretty cool, technically I'm standing right where George Washington had lunch when he was on his way into Wilmington for his visit as part of his southern tour of the United States in 1791. Now, again, you can hear it's very loud because of all the cars, but I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to show you what this is. So, this tree is incredibly old. I think one estimation I heard of it was at least 600 years old. It definitely shows its age, but it's kind of spectacular if you're just kind of standing under its branches here. You can see that they kind of hang low like old trees kind of do. But this tree, as I said, George Washington and his men, as they came down what was an old road from New Bern to Wilmington, they stopped underneath this tree in April 1791. He arrived in Wilmington on the 24th from New Bern, and he just had lunch here. You know, there's the old story that for that lunch, he wanted mullet. But as they say, the fish just weren't biting that day. They weren't jumping that day. And so he had to settle for ham instead. And if you can put that together, Hampstead, ham instead. And so that's the legend. As people I've talked to say that fits a little too well. But the people here in Hampstead, they kind of own that legend. They kind of like it. So I'm going to show you that while there's not that many cars coming, it might be a little quieter. In 1925, the Daughters of the American Revolution actually put a marker here because this is known as the spot where George Washington stopped. And so there is a marker here signifying his, I guess, stopover between New Bern and Wilmington. And it was... And, you know, we're about 15 miles outside of Wilmington. It would have been several more miles down the road that he would have been met by a light horse cavalry, and they would have escorted him into Wilmington. And these are stories that we tell on today's episode of Cape Fear Unearthed, which, if you don't know, is our local history podcast. Every 2 weeks, we release an episode telling a different story from the region. And this week, I wanted to do something that acknowledged the election, but we don't get into politics on the show too much. But I wanted to acknowledge the fact that we are on the cusp of a very important presidential election. And the presidential debates start next week. And so this was our way of basically coming out and acknowledging the president's ties to Wilmington, all the way back to George Washington. And the other presidents are James Monroe, James K. Polk, who was a North Carolina native. We have Millard Fillmore, and then what was the biggest celebration, or at least the one most, well documented, was the visit from William Howard Taft on November 9th, 1909. So if you're interested in presidential history that doesn't require you to think about the politics of today, I would encourage you to go listen to our new episode of Cape Fear Unearthed, because it's a fun one. I learned a lot just researching the episodes. But again, this is the Washington Oak. And I'm going to say it again because it's just kind of cool to say that I'm standing where George Washington would have stood in 1791. He would not have had to speak over traffic like I'm having to do right now. It would have been a much quieter scene out here. You would have been able to hear the crickets in the distance and the wind through what was even more trees. But as you can see, this tree, which again estimates, some people have said that it could be 600 years old. It is feet In fact, it's not even just feet. It's like just a few feet from the actual curb here along US 17. So it's, you know, it's kind of hard to put into words the fact that this piece of history, which again is marked by a pretty big stone marker put here by the the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR. And they put this here in 1925. This marker is, and this tree, they are just incredibly close to the road. And so I hope that it gets to stand as long as it can. Again, its branches very much stretch over the road. And over here, like I said when we first started, it's one of those trees, one of those old, cool trees where its branches, it's had to hold up its branches for so many years that they kind of droop, as you can see. And they're Spanish moss. I mean, it's a gorgeous tree. I think that, you know, just separate of its historic value, it's just kind of a stunning remnant of a long gone past of Wilmington and this whole region. Because technically we're not in Wilmington, we're in Hampstead. But again, I wanted to show you guys this because this is one piece, one vestige of those stories we tell on today's Cape Fear Unearthed podcast about presidential visits to Wilmington. And, you know, we stick to only 5 presidential visits for this particular show because, for several reasons. And I'll tell you these. We stick to Washington, Monroe, one escaping me, Monroe, Polk, Fillmore, and Taft, because those are the historic ones. Those are the historic visits. We also have, you know, most recently Donald Trump would have joined that list because while he did speak about the campaign while he was here, his purpose for being here was to name Wilmington the nation's first World War II heritage city. And that is it wasn't a part of a campaign. And so I didn't include any presidents who came here that were part of campaigns. You know, during the 2016 election, there were several presidential candidates who came here. And in previous presidential campaigns, there's been ones. But we only stuck to those 5 presidential campaigns because I wanted to stay away from politics. I wanted to just show how the presidents in the past had come here to celebrate Wilmington and meet the people. And we also did not include Jefferson Davis, as a few people have pointed out, because he was not a president of the United States. He was the president, the one and only president of the Confederate States of America. And we're about to enter into an election. We're in a campaign for an election for the United States president. And so I wanted to stick to those that are included in our nation's 45 presidents. So again, behind me, as you can see, I'll switch around one more time before I sign off. This is the Washington Oak here along US 17 in Hampstead. George Washington himself is said to have sat underneath this tree in the spring of 1791, April 24th to be exact, on his way into Wilmington as part of his tour of the southern states, his very famous southern tour, which he made to the Carolinas, to Georgia and Virginia. He was 2 years into his presidency, and he wanted to get a feel for the states that were now part of the country that he was the first president of. He wanted to understand them. He'd never visited the states south of this area. And so it was a really, really big deal. And this was the tree under which he stopped to have his lunch as he made his way into Wilmington. And again, it would have been a lot quieter. We're having to contend with the sound volume of the traffic here. But this is the Washington Oak. So again, I would encourage anyone who's interested about presidential visits to Wilmington that don't have ties to our current political election, the current politics of the time, go back and listen to when these presidents came to Wilmington. They're really fascinating stories, and some of them are interesting displays of the time period in which they happened. There was some really grand parades and stuff that happened when they came to Wilmington, especially for William Howard Taft. in 1909. So again, go listen to the Cape Fear Unearthed podcast that I host. The episode is out today. We've got some historic photos online, and you can visit starnewsonline.com to see those. And you can listen to Cape Fear Unearthed on any podcast platform you might want to listen to. We have it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. It's on Audible. It's on Amazon Music. All kinds of things. You can find it anywhere. And if you don't want to, or if you don't have a smartphone, you can also listen to it for free online. And you can search Omni and Cape Fear Unearthed, and Omni is OMNY. So again, come celebrate Wilmington history. Again, this is the tree that George Washington sat under when he was making his way into Wilmington in 1791. It's one of the 5 stories that we tell on this week's episode of the Cape Fear Unearthed podcast, and they're all really fascinating. And the next time you're driving up US 17, either to or from Hampstead, you can look to the side and see this tree, and you can see this marker put up by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1925 to commemorate this spot. And I'll tell you, if you're looking for kind of a landmark to understand where it's at, they just built, or recently built, a retirement home, a retirement village right here beside it. So you can see that not only the tree, not only is it close to US 17, it's literally right in front of a retirement home. So, and I'm going to step back so you can see kind of the full view of this tree. But yes, that is the Washington oak. So listen to the show. Again, it's Cape Fear Unearthed, and learn a little about our local presidential history from 1791 to 1909. Thank you, everyone. And if you need more information about Cape Fear Unearthed, you can ask a question on our Facebook, or you can find the Cape Fear Unearthed Facebook page, our Facebook group, where I post all of our shows and all of our coverage. And join the conversation with us. We have a lot of fun with local history. Thanks, everyone, and have a great weekend.